By the time your doctor tells you your blood sugar is high, you probably had insulin resistance for 10 years, maybe more. Your fasting glucose looked normal at every annual physical. Your A1C was fine. And that entire time, your body was burning through a hidden compensation system, trying to keep those numbers looking fine. By the time the lab values finally crack, the damage has been quietly building for a decade. This is one of the most underdiagnosed conditions in adult medicine, and almost nothing online describes it accurately. My background is exercise physiology and nutrition before going into peripheral nerve surgery, and now I work with people online, helping them understand how metabolic health drives nearly every chronic condition I used to treat surgically. Insulin resistance is the single most important metabolic dial for almost everyone over 35. It drives the weight gain, the fatigue, the brain fog you're feeling right now, and it sets the stage for nearly every chronic disease that defines the second half of life. Let me show you what's actually happening inside your cells. Insulin resistance is not a damage problem, it's a signaling problem. And that distinction is everything. Here's what's happening. When you eat, your pancreas releases insulin. Insulin's job is to knock on the door of the cells and tell them to open up and let glucose in. In insulin resistance, the knock still happens, the hormone is still there, but the message stops getting through inside the cell. So your pancreas does what any other system does when it's being ignored. It knocks louder. It releases more insulin. This is called hyperinsulinemia, chronically elevated insulin. And it precedes the rise in fasting glucose by years, sometimes more than a decade. Your blood sugar looks normal because your body is screaming at it to look normal. That's not health, that's compensation system running at maximum. The receptor still works, the hormone is still present. The chain that connects them has been chemically blocked. Remove the upstream cause and the chain functions again. That's why this is reversible. Here's why this gets missed for so long. Routine primary care doesn't measure fasting insulin. They measure glucose and A1C, and both are late stage markers. So what does early insulin resistance actually feel like? It feels like a body that used to respond to your effort and then suddenly doesn't. Stubborn belly fat that doesn't budge no matter how clean you eat. Energy crashes 1 or 2 hours after meals, especially carb heavy ones. Cravings for sugar or starch that hit hardest in the late afternoon, brain fog after eating, sleep that's lighter than it used to be, skin tags showing up where there weren't before, dark velvety patches in your neck folds or armpits. That's one that's called acanthosis nigricans, and it's a fairly specific external sign of significant hyperinsulinemia. In women, it can show up as irregular cycles, unexplained facial hair, or the cluster of symptoms doctors label as PCOS, which at its root is very often driven by insulin resistance. None of these symptoms are diagnostic on their own. Together in the right context, they should prompt testing. And most of the time they don't because nobody's looking. If you've ever been told your labs look great while you feel terrible, listen closely. The standard panel is missing the most important number. A standard fasting glucose test will miss insulin resistance for years. So will A1C. They're both downstream measures. They only become abnormal once the compensation system is failing. The test you actually want is fasting insulin. In many metabolic clinics, an optimal fasting insulin is below 7 or 8. Above 10 or 12 raises real concern, even when your glucose is perfectly normal. The standard lab will report anything below 25 as normal, which is a number that has nothing to do with metabolic health and everything to do with not flagging too many people. There's also a calculation called the HOMA-IR. It uses your fasting glucose and fasting insulin together. Commonly used reference points are below 1 is optimal, above 2 is consistent with insulin resistance, and above 2.75 is significant. If you're going to ask for one new test at your next physical, ask for a fasting insulin. That single number will tell you more about your metabolic future than almost anything on the standard panel. A normal fasting glucose with a fasting insulin of 18 is not normal. It's a body running on its emergency system every single day to look fine on paper. Here's the part that catches people completely off guard. You can be thin and still be insulin resistant. There's a phenotype researchers called TOFI, thin outside, fat inside. Normal body weight, normal BMI, elevated visceral fat, fat inside the liver, fat inside the muscle cells. Insulin resistance is already in motion, and these patients get reassured that they're fine because the scale says they're fine. Two people with identical body weight can have radically different insulin sensitivity based on where the fat is sitting. It's not how much you weigh, it's where your body is storing the fat. It can't store anywhere else. This matters especially if you have South Asian, East Asian, or Middle Eastern ancestry. A South Asian BMI of 19.6 carries roughly the same metabolic risk as a white BMI of 25. The screening cutoffs that work for one population fail another. If you've been told you're fine because your BMI is fine and you still feel off, this is the conversation to have. Here's what to actually do with this information. At your next physical, ask for three things: fasting insulin, fasting glucose, and an A1C. Then calculate your HOMA-IR. Multiply your fasting glucose by your fasting insulin and divide by 405. If your number is above 2, you have a starting point. The molecular defects behind insulin resistance are reversible, but you can't fix what you haven't measured. Most people who finally see their fasting insulin numbers for the first time have one reaction. I've felt like this in my body for years, and now I finally have a name for it. If you watch this so far, you probably recognize yourself in some sort of it. That's worth taking seriously. I do a free 10-minute metabolic health discovery call where we can walk through your labs, your symptoms, and whether this fits your situation. The link is in the description. If you'd rather start on your own, I also have a book on metabolic health, but the call is free, much faster, and it's an easy way to figure out where you actually stand. In the next video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how this gets reversed, the mechanism, the timeline, and what the actual clinical trial data shows about how many people get into full remission. It's more hopeful than you think. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Your metabolism isn't broken, it's just been ignored, and that's a very fixable problem.